Okay, everyone, welcome back. Welcome back to the REO and Short Sale Mastery. My name is Ben Barber. I'm going to be taking you through one of the most important decks that we have, which is REO 101. And with REO 101, it's going to be a longer course, but it's going to be a crash course on the whole REO process that not a lot of people know about, okay? So we really only have one outcome for this entire module, and that's really total domination, right? We want to build a foundation for total REO mastery and domination by dissecting, discussing, and then understanding the REO process soup to nuts. Soup to nuts really just means from cradle to grave. These are things you're going to get used to in the REO business. There's a lot of different terms and REOEs, and a lot of these outsourcers are Southern boys, and they say things like soup to nuts, which in the South was starting dinner with soup and ending it with dessert nuts, okay? It just means we're going to take everything from start to finish. Now, the question is, how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to break this module up into three different things. We're going to go very deep and understand, the REO life cycle. We're going to take an asset from foreclosure all the way through all the processes to selling it to a new end user. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to go deep and we're going to understand three things. Number one, we're going to understand the REO life cycle. That is going to be our soup to nuts review. Okay, we're going to start with our appetizer is going to be foreclosure and the foreclosure process. We're going to go through eviction, redemption, confirmation, and we're going to take it all the way through marketing and closing, which will be our nuts. It'll be our dessert. All right. Along the way, we are going to review terms, definition, slang, and REOEs like soup to nuts. All right, because I want you to be able to understand what the outsourcers are talking about and have a conversation with them without spelling things out like broker price opinion when you can just say BPO, or cash for keys when you can say CFK. All right, and then the third thing we're going to review is really the players. We're going to look at who the outsourcers are and how they operate. We're going to look at the asset managers, which is one of your primary objectives, is to have a great relationship and partnership with the asset managers. And then we're also going to look at the supporting players. So that's going to be your prop res vendors. It's going to be accounting with your outsourcer. It's going to be the clients. It's going to be title, closing, even your own personal staff that's helping you as you go after the REO business, okay? So we're going to break it down into those three parts to make sure we have a full understanding. Okay, so first things first, what is REO? REO stands for real estate owned, okay? Real estate owned, REO, not REO Speedwagon, but also called bank owned, right? So you'll hear this used interchangeably throughout the process. It's a bank owned home, it's an REO. Most people will think of it as a foreclosure, right? A foreclosure, a single family residence is the foreclosure. That's an REO, that's a bank owned property. But keep in mind that REO is really just any property that's been received through foreclosure, but also through short sale or a deed in lieu of foreclosure, right? So an REO is any property that was taken back by the bank. Okay, so we know that REO has been taken back through foreclosure, through a deed in lieu of foreclosure, or through a short sale. But what kind of properties are we looking at, right? We've got townhouses, right? We've got townhouses, row ends, middle ends. We've got condos, high-rise projects, low-rise projects. And then because you are looking at an owner-occupant 2 to 4 unit, you're going to see some of those come over. Not a ton, but you could see a multi-unit property, really no more than 4 units if you're doing residential. Now, because we said it is bank-owned, you may even see some commercial business, right? Depending on the clients that you're working with, some smaller banks and credit unions will lend money to an investor for a commercial property, and if they're unable to maintain that property and make the payments, then the bank will take it back just like they would a traditional home. So you may actually lose a commercial project to foreclosure because remember, REO is just simply property that's been received through foreclosure, a short sale, or a deed in lieu of foreclosure, right? But 90% of you are going to work with residential homes, and the majority of your homes are going to be like this. So yeah. Now, who owns the REO? Well, there's a couple players in here. The number one thing people think of is the banks, right? The banks that lent money on the property and then had to take it back through foreclosure or deed in lieu of foreclosure, or they were able to sell it through a short sale. So you're looking at 3 big players and then a handful of smaller ones, but Wells Fargo, Bank of America and Chase handle the majority of the REO directly from the bank. Now, some other big clients are going to be your GSEs. That's Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae. You're going to see VA, which is where I worked for 3 years. You're going to see some examples of those, but you can also see some investors that buys big pools of REO to sell them. So you can work for a variety of clients, right? The main thing is to understand that anybody can own it, and we're going to walk through the foreclosure process so that you see exactly what happens at foreclosure and how they take the properties back. So we're going to walk through the foreclosure process in 3 steps, right? And we're going to look really high level, but the idea, again, is to give you an understanding of the entire process as we build towards mastery. So foreclosure process in 3 steps. Number 1, a notice of default or intent to sell is posted. So here's a notice. These are just some examples that I pulled off online. And basically what you'll see is saying, hey, we're going to take this property back. Okay. If we look over here on the right, we can see the notice of the trustee's sale. It says you are in default under a deed of trust. Unless you take action to protect your property, it may be sold at public sale, which is an auction. If you need an explanation of the nature of the proceedings against you, you should contact a lawyer. And then on the left, we have a notice of default, right? Notice of default and election to sell under a deed of trust. So this company, First American Trustee, is representing Wells Fargo, which is one of our big banks. And on here, we can see this. They're saying, hey, look, the original note for $456,000 has not been paid. And then at the bottom, it basically says if we can't bring that current, then the property may be sold to satisfy the obligations. Okay, we're going to post a notice of default on the property and in a public place, most likely the newspaper, for a period of time, usually 3 weeks. And then after that time frame has passed is when we'll proceed with the foreclosure. Okay. The second step is we're actually going to have a foreclosure sale. Okay, and it's going to be conducted by the trustee, and the trustee is just a representative of the courts or of the bank or lender that's foreclosing. All right, so I put these pictures up here just to demonstrate a couple different ways that the foreclosure takes place, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, but up at the top you have a ballroom, which is one of the most popular ways for REO to be sold, and they basically will have a list. Investors will have a list. They're going to go out to the ballroom and see these properties on the big screen, and they're going to make bids. On the bottom left here, we have buying a property directly at the courthouse steps. Okay, and then on the right, we have the property being sold directly at the home. Okay, the majority of the shows that you see on TV, the flipping shows, are taking place a foreclosure sale directly at the home. All right, so here's what's going to happen. There's a bidding process, right? So just because it's foreclosure doesn't mean that the bank is taking the property back and then trying to sell it. What they're going to do is they're going to say there's a minimum bid established, and that minimum bid is typically the past due balance plus any fees that the bank has incurred trying to collect the past due amount. The highest bidder over that reserve wins the property, right? They get it. It's theirs. That's what winning looks like, right? Everybody's excited. Now, if the minimum reserve is not met, right? If my reserve is $100,000 and the highest bid that I get is $80,000, then the bank is basically going to buy the property back from themselves. Okay, so it becomes their REO, they're responsible for it. And that's what that looks like, right? That's not winning. The third step, making the property an REO and getting ready to dispose of it. Okay, so the property is sold at foreclosure. It's either going to be sold to a private investor, or the bank's going to take it back, or maybe a hedge fund is going to come in and buy a bulk of properties at the ballroom sale, right? But either way, the property has come back through foreclosure, somebody owns it, and now it's officially REO. Okay? Once it's officially REO, which again stands for real estate owned, it's going to be assigned to an outsourcer or managed in-house. Now, once we get to REO, there are going to be 3 main phases. So we're going to have subcategories for each phase. But if we're looking at REO as a whole on a timeline, there are 3 phases, the beginning, the middle, and the end, right? Just like a great movie, first, second, and third act. So as we move into this, the first act, our first step is a pre-list. And think of pre-list as anything that happens to the property before it hits the market. All right, that's the easiest way to remember it. So that's going to include our redemption or our confirmation periods. After that, we're going to go through eviction if the property is occupied. Once the property has been vacated or found vacant, Then we're going to go through our initial services to get the property ready for valuations. And then we're going to send a couple independent parties out to do valuations on the property so that we can reconcile it and figure out what the value of the property is, and then how we're going to market it. Once the property has been confirmed vacant, and we've already gone through our redemption and our confirmation period, we're going to do our initial services, and then we're going to get our valuations. Once we have the valuations, the asset manager is then going to reconcile the values and come up with the marketing strategy. Okay? And as they're determining the marketing strategy, they're going to either go as is, or they're going to make repairs to the property. So during the marketing phase, they're going to determine what repairs need to be made, and then what the strategy is that includes target buyer and type of financing. After that, the home's going to be listed on the MLS, and ideally we would go right to offer management and contract execution, but if the property doesn't sell, then we may have to do some price reductions. So anything that happens during the marketing phase is very similar to traditional sales with REO. So once we've agreed to terms, we've executed the contract, just like traditional sales, we're going to proceed with closing. The buyer is going to take all the necessary steps to solidify their financing, or if they're cash, they're going to wire the money and go through their due diligence. And then the title service is going to work on transferring marketable title over to the new owners. So we have gone through the foreclosure process. The property is now an REO, whether it's owned by the bank because no one met the minimum bid, or a hedge fund or a private investor bought the property back, and it's been assigned now to an outsourcer or to an in-house team to start proceeding with disposition to basically recover the money. And the very first step is to determine if we are in a redemption or a confirmation state. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you the very complicated explanation of both. Here's redemption. We're going to do, Judge Alex is going to give us this one first. So redemption is for non-judicial states. In this situation, the homeowner redeems the mortgage and keeps the house if they can pay back the entire balance that is owed, plus any fees, within a certain period of time. Okay? Now, redemption costs typically include the foreclosure sale price and then any interest or allowable fees that have happened since then. Okay? Now, confirmation is different. It's for judicial states. In the judicial states, where the foreclosure was performed by the courts, the process of confirming the sale is basically doing a couple things. One, we're going to confirm that it was purchased at market value, okay? And then we're going to make sure that the foreclosure was done correctly. So whoever owns the property, it's this part right here, a creditor may claim deficiency after the foreclosure sale, is a complicated way of saying they're going to write the loss off of their books. And then they're going to go after the former owner for that gap, okay? So if the former owner feels like their claim about how much they lost is inaccurate, then you could actually have a confirmation hearing, and then they're going to determine if fair market value was paid for the property. So I want to simplify this for you and just say this, that in redemption, the owners can pay the balance and keep the home within a certain period of time, okay? Confirmation is you're just waiting for the courts to confirm the foreclosure sale. And that confirmation may include making sure that it was sold for fair market value and making sure that the foreclosure was done correctly. Because the foreclosure laws per state are changing and there are updates made consistently, one of the best resources is going to be online information like this. The web address for this is www.foreclosurelaw.org. You would simply go and click on your state. So I'm going to click on Utah, and I would get all the information that I need. So this is going to help you regardless of where you're at. Down in Texas, we can look at all of their information and use this as a resource to get some basic information, but you're also going to be working with an eviction attorney and an eviction coordinator through the whole process. So this is really just if you want to know information on your own. Otherwise, you're going to have professionals that are going to help you navigate the redemption and the confirmation period. Here's the thing I want you to remember as we're moving through this. There is a difference between eviction and foreclosure. And a lot of times people will use the two as one or the other, and that's just not the case. So foreclosure is legally transferring ownership. So in this scenario, with this photo, we're actually selling this property at the courthouse steps. We're getting a new owner as long as they meet those minimum bids, and then it's going to the highest bidder. An eviction is different because with an eviction, the foreclosure has already taken place. We own the property, okay? And now we're actually going to get a court order to physically remove any remaining occupants from the house. Does that make sense? Okay. Evictions can take a long time. If the courts are backed up, it can take a while to actually process an eviction all the way through. But in the end, the bank is going to win. And I think it's important that you understand that, because at some point during the eviction process, you're going to be tasked with offering cash for keys if the client has that program available. And as you're communicating with occupants and helping them understand what the process is, it's important for you to understand that eventually the bank is going to win. Okay? Now, there may be that 1 in a million shot where the foreclosure was done incorrectly, or maybe there was a clerical error and they've got the wrong house. That's a 1 in a million shot. The majority of the time, the bank is going to win, and I need you to understand that. An easy way to think about it, think about Vegas, okay? The bank is like Vegas. They have the money and the time to just stick around until they win. And they have a right to take the home back because they did lend the money and the money wasn't paid back, okay? One thing I want to do as we're going through this program is to show you how the bank takes a property back. So let's go through the eviction process. And guys, keep in mind that this is very high level because this is a very complicated process. So as you get an assignment and you're going through eviction, ask questions. There's never a dumb question. Work with your eviction coordinator, work with the eviction attorney, and make sure you understand 100% what is expected of you, what the timeframes are, and how you go about reporting back to the outsourcer, okay? So let's walk through this. Very high level, the first thing we're going to do is post the foreclosure notice. The eviction attorney is going to file an unlawful detainer lawsuit in whatever court has jurisdiction. We're going to wait for a written response to be received by the occupants. If they respond, it will go to trial. If not, then we're going to ask for a default judgment. A writ of possession will be issued by the judge, and then we're going to go to a lockout. Okay? So here's the foreclosure notice. With that foreclosure notice, it's going to be posted on the property, just like we did with our notice of default, and it's going to advertise that the home was just taken back through foreclosure sale. And then with that document, it's going to request any legitimate renters to prevent a valid lease, or if they're not legitimate renters, it's going to ask them to voluntarily vacate the property. So the second step is filing the unlawful detainer lawsuit, and this is really just what it sounds like. It's just a complaint that's filed with the court saying, hey, they're living in the property unlawfully. We've gone through foreclosure. They're technically trespassing. We'd like to have the property back. So a summons is going to be issued by the court for the defendants, think of the defendants as the occupants, to respond to the complaint. And it's going to give them a certain amount of time to do that, and that's going to vary by state. So I haven't put any of the information up here because you're going to want to coordinate that or understand that from your eviction attorney or the assigned eviction specialist. Once the summons has been received by the defendant, by the occupants, they have a specific amount of time to basically respond in writing to the complaint of an unlawful detainer. So basically, they have a certain amount of time to write a letter to the court saying why they should not be evicted, why they are not trespassing, okay? They're going to file a written response with the court because that's going to be used in the event that it goes to trial so that the plaintiff can rebut anything that they're saying, okay? So think of it like that. If a written response is received, it's just going to state why the occupants believe they shouldn't be evicted. Okay? Now, if the occupants do file a written response saying that the eviction should not be valid, then basically they're contesting the eviction. They're saying, we plan on contesting the eviction, so a judge is going to order a trial if that happens. The majority of assets, when they're assigned to an eviction attorney, are going to be assigned to a national vendor, a national attorney, who is going to oversee attorneys within the states, okay? It would be a big task for each outsourcer to manage every single local attorney, so they hire a national attorney with connections in all the different states to manage the process. that's going to be a flat fee service. So let's say I'm going to pay Debbie Bass and her company $500 for every eviction file, and then she's just going to farm it out. If we go to trial, a trial is something completely separate that needs to be approved through the eviction specialist, through the bank, paid directly to the eviction attorney, because now they can actually start charging by the hour, okay? But a trial is exactly what it sounds like. The occupants have said, you can't kick us out. The bank is saying, yes, we can. And the judge is saying, okay, bring me all the evidence and I'm going to make my decision. Does that make sense? So the eviction attorney is going to present their case for the bank for why they should take possession, and the occupants are going to present their case why they should be allowed to stay. This is my honorary judge, and he's just going to make a decision. Okay, so after trial, he's going to make a decision. If there is no trial, then the attorney is going to ask for a default judgment because they never responded to the summons. Okay. With the writ of possession, once we have a default judgment or a judgment for the bank, then we are going to have a writ of possession issued, which is a notice of judgment for the bank that's going to be posted on the property. Now, the amount of time that the occupants are going to have to vacate the property before a lockout is going to vary depending on what county we're in. In this example that I have, we're in Miami-Dade County, and with this eviction, they basically have 24 hours. Okay, so if we read through it, we've got the court case, we've got the address, and this paragraph simply says a court order has been issued requiring all persons to be removed from these premises. Florida statutes direct that this is a final 24-hour notice of eviction, and if the property is not vacated, the Miami-Dade Police Department will be required to remove all persons from the premises, and that's a lockout. Okay, they've got it signed by the officer that delivered it. They've got the date that it was delivered. And if people don't move out by then we're going to come complete a lockout. When the sheriff or the constable goes to complete the lockout, they are going to bring a crew of anywhere from 2 to 10 people to physically remove the personal items from the home and place them on the curb. And when I say place them on the curb, I mean literally take everything out of the house and put it on the curb, regardless of the weather. Okay? Locks are going to be changed on the spot. The occupants are going to be physically removed, and if they resist, they're going to be arrested for trespassing, and then we're going to move all the personal property right to the curb, regardless of what's in there and regardless of the weather. So here's an illustration that shows exactly how the lockout's going to go down. Okay, I have it broken down into 4 places. So the very first one is the sheriff or the constable is going to coordinate the day and time of the lockout, which will typically be a certain amount of time after that final eviction notice is posted. Once the sheriff or the constable enters the property, the occupants are going to have a limited amount of time to get all of their stuff and get out. But the sheriff is watching them, and really they're watching them to make sure, A, that they don't harm anybody, that they don't pull any weapons, right? No guns, no knives, nothing like that. And they're also going to make sure that they don't damage the property on their way out. Okay? Once the occupants have been removed from the property, the crew that came with the sheriff or the constable is going to start removing anything left over from the house. And they're basically just going to box up what they can. They're going to put things in bags. They may take, like that TV there, they may take that directly to the curb. And then, like I said, regardless of the weather or the possibility of theft or whatever the items are, they're just going to put it right on the curb. That's a lockout, okay? They're taking all of the personal items inside the house, regardless of what they are, and they're just putting them right on the curb. I put this picture up here just because I wanted to show you that this is what's going to happen when you get all the way to a lockout. And that's why you need to help the occupants understand that eventually the bank will win and that this is a very real scenario that they're looking at. That everything that they hold dear to them is going to be moved to the street and anybody can come by and go through it. The weather can come down. It can rain on it. Doesn't matter. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that nobody wants to complete a lockout. Nobody wants it to go that far. We want to resolve it beforehand. And a lot of times you're going to see that once it gets to that final notice and the sheriff has posted an eviction and said, hey, I'm going to be back in 24 hours, most people are going to voluntarily vacate the property and just leave behind whatever trash they don't want. Now, with the eviction, we talked about personal property really just in passing. And here's the thing that we want to say. Personal property is anything that belongs to the occupant, okay? Now, with personal property, if we have gone through and completed an eviction, then technically we completed an eviction on the personal property, which is why the sheriff was able to take the trash out to the curb. If, however, the occupants left the home and said, I'm not going to be here when the lockout happens, or left any time prior to that, and you go out and you see that the property is vacant, but there are items remaining, it's personal property. Here's my disclaimer for this. Personal property has the potential to get you and the outsourcer and the bank into a ton of trouble. So I'm going to give you some general guidelines and advice with personal property, but I cannot tell you anything more important than this. Always check with the eviction attorney or the evictional specialist if you are unsure with how to proceed with any personal property items, okay? Because I'm going to give you high level and some details, but I can't name every single item that you're going to find in a home. Does that make sense? Okay. And if you have questions about personal property, we can always talk about this offline, okay? So here's how we're going to define it, and this is how most people are going to define it. We're going to err on the side of caution, and we're going to go as low as possible and say personal property is anything with a garage sale value, a total garage sale value. So if I walk into a room, if I were to gather everything, if the garage sale value is over $300, it's personal property and needs to either go through a personal property eviction, or we need to lock the house up, put a personal property notice, post it on the property, allow 30 days or whatever the state timelines are to pass, and then we can trash it out. Now, here are some things that do not have to meet the dollar amount threshold. Okay, it's really easiest way to look at it. It's a handful of things. It's records and certificates, so birth and death records, tax records, military documents, articles, and awards. And the thing with the military items, if you see any military articles at all, it's personal property and it needs to actually go through an eviction or a posting. Okay, that can include boots, military socks, badges, like mission badges, anything like that. Okay. School report cards, diplomas, school books, any health insurance or insurance paperwork. So these are personal items, okay? Business records, deeds, liens, legal papers, any lock boxes or safes, any personal mail. So what a lot of banks are going to do is say, hey, look, if you guys see anything, let's just go ahead and go through a personal property eviction, or let's do our notice, because it's not always a 30-day notice. It really just depends on the state. Some states it's a 14-day notice, some it's a 10-day notice. Here's an example of a post for abandoned property. It says, hey, when you left this property, you left this personal stuff behind. Okay, here's what you can do to claim it. Now, you could have a contact information for the agent that says, hey, you can contact me at this number to pick up your things. No problem. It may have someone from the prop pres company. That's fine. But it's basically just a letter saying, hey, you left this stuff. Here's how you can get it back. Okay, that's all it's saying. Here's your stuff. Here's who you contact to arrange to get that back for you. And we're going to keep it under lock and key. So that while the notice is posted, we can say, yes, the property was secure while it was with us. And then once that notice expires, you can put it directly on the curb like they did during the trash out. So again, work with the eviction attorney or the eviction coordinator to determine how you need to proceed with personal property. But one of the outcomes for this program that Josh and I have is for you to protect yourself while you're out there, because this is a much different world than traditional sales. These are areas where you can get into trouble. It is not unlikely to have a former occupant who voluntarily vacated be upset and come back and say they left their grandma's diamond ring on the dresser and you stole it. Okay? I had someone argue with me when I was an eviction manager saying that we went out and trashed out their Playboy collection that was worth a fortune. Okay, that stuff's going to happen. So that's why we err on the side of caution. We work with the eviction coordinator. We work with the eviction attorney. If you don't know what something is valued as, give it the highest amount possible so it reaches the threshold and you have to go through a personal property eviction or a posting. If you see anything close to personal items, military articles, things like that, notify your eviction coordinator and your eviction attorney so you can proceed the correct way. Okay? For asset assignment, I wasn't really sure if I should put this at the very beginning or keep it here after eviction. So as we look at this, understand that this asset assignment could come at any point, really just depending on what your outsourcer and what your client are doing. Like I said with redemption and confirmation, there are a lot of banks that say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to hold on to this asset until the confirmation period expires or until the redemption period expires. And then if I still have this asset and it hasn't been redeemed, and if the foreclosure sale has been confirmed, then I'll give it to the outsourcer to start doing work. You won't see an assignment until after that. If the bank is okay with assigning it to an outsourcer during the redemption or the confirmation period, you may see the assignment then. There are also some other places that are going to do their own evictions and offer their own cash for keys and do all that stuff before they assign it to you, and they may just assign it to you to verify that it's vacant after they proceed with an eviction. That's fine. So this may seem like it's a little out of place, and it's not meant to. It's meant to complement everything else that's going on, but understand that you could have an asset assignment at any point, and generally speaking, this is how that flow is going to go. The very first thing you're going to do is inspect the property. Okay? What we're looking for is we're looking for code violations, we're looking for safety issues, we're looking for damage to the property, but during that very first assignment, we're looking to see if the property is still occupied. Okay, so I've got this photo of this girl looking in the window, and we will literally look in the windows, but the very first step, of course, is to knock on the door, have your card ready, be ready to present your information. And if no one's there, we're going to knock on the door. A couple different things we're going to do as well. You're going to vary the time of your inspection. We're going to go by at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and at 5 o'clock p.m. and 8 o'clock. And we're going to look for things like lights turning on and off. We're going to look for cars coming and going. Okay? We're going to look for notices that are posted on the door being taken in. We're going to look at the meter, and we're going to see if it's still running, if the gas meter is still running. Okay? After you've done your occupancy inspection, you may be required to post notices from the seller that can include contact information for you, contact information for the outsourcer or for the bank directly. It could be property pres vendor information. It could be know your options or know your rights. Fannie Mae does a know your options letter that goes out. There are a lot of banks that will do the same thing. So you're going to post whatever required documentation. Okay, so let's talk about initial property services. We have vacated the property now. We've either done it through a couple ways. We've gone out and we've seen that the property is not occupied. The occupants voluntarily vacated. We completed a lockout, or we completed cash for keys and now we've taken the property back. So the property was vacated in some manner, and now it's time to start initial services where we're actually going to go start maintaining that property and taking care of the property and prep it to go onto the market. Okay? So this is a standard list of initial services, and your outsourcer may have a different list. They may have a smaller list, or they may have a more robust list, but basically this is what is industry standard for initial services. Okay? And we're going to walk through each one of these so you can get an idea of what's expected once that property becomes vacant, and now we're getting ready to market it. So we're in the pre-list phase, okay, getting the asset ready for the market, and we're going to do a couple things. We're going to rekey the property. We're going to do a trash out. The reason the trash out is there, so a trash out would be avoided if we'd have done cash for keys and then they left the home in broom swept condition. Also, if you had a lockout, there should be no items in the house because that was all removed by a crew when the sheriff went out. Okay, but if they voluntarily vacated and there's still items there, and we had to do a personal property eviction and they didn't come and take them back, then we're going to trash out the property. Or if it was all just garbage and we didn't need to do a personal property eviction, then we're going to trash it out. We're going to take care of the lawn. We're going to do a winterization, and I've got an asterisk there because that's only going to apply during certain months. We're going to do a sales clean, and then, of course, a swimming pool, if a swimming pool exists, and we're going to make sure the property is safe and secure. So the rekey is exactly what it sounds like. We are going to pay a locksmith to go out and rekey all of the main doors, and then we're going to set a mechanical key box on the property somewhere. And that mechanical key box is going to basically give access to the bank and the outsourcer because they don't have super access. So once that mechanical key box is in place and you've rekeyed the property, you want to make extra copies of the key because a lot of people, unfortunately, a lot of vendors just take the key with them accidentally. And it's a lot easier to just go replace it with a $5 replica key than to send somebody out to rekey the property all the time. So like I said, the mechanical box is going to be for your clients, for the outsourcer and for the bank, and then also for your vendors, so your property preservation vendors, anybody else you're working with that doesn't have access to an electronic box or a Supra. And then your agents who are doing showings should use your electronic box so that you can track who's been in and out of the property. So here's a photo I took the other day. This is a house just down the street from my house that's an REO, where we've got the mechanical box right there. That's for the bank and the outsourcer and the vendors. And then we've got the Super box, which is our electronic box for our MLS and for our agents. And that's what we use to access the home. Okay. Trash out. So we talked about trash out. Trash out's only going to happen if the property is vacated and we don't need to do a personal property eviction, or a personal property eviction has expired, or if that dollar amount doesn't meet the threshold. All right. So this crew is basically filling up a big container out there with garbage. So you're typically going to have what's called in scope trash out, because it can get very expensive if you have like a hoarder house and you've got rooms full of junk. It can get very expensive to have a crew get all those items, trash it out, take it to the dump, all that good stuff. Okay. So what most banks are going to do is say, hey, we have general guidelines for our vendors to go out and do a trash out, and it's typically 30 cubic yards. So this guy right here is standing next to a container that is 30 cubic yards. That's going to hold a lot of trash. And you can see that these guys are basically using the exact same container, and you can get a ton of stuff in there. Okay. Anything outside of that would need to be bid separately and approved by the outsourcer, assuming that they're working with that. So the general trash out guidelines, make sure you're adhering to the personal property guidelines for the state or established by your client. And then this is just an example of a 30 cubic yard container. Now, you're going to contact the police if there are any firearms, and they will come and dispose of those. Now, work with your outsourcer to dispose of any toxic materials. Okay, and here's just a couple examples. One of the number ones you're going to see is just car items. Like you're going to see old car batteries, oil, and tires. So work with the outsourcer. You're going to have to probably bid that separately so it can be disposed of, but the prop pres vendors may be able to do that. Your outsourcer is going to have a strategy for that. So work with them in identifying and then getting rid of any toxic materials. So here is an example of a trash out. This is a good trash out. So we're assuming that we don't need to do a personal property eviction because we have a ton of things here. So let's say the personal property notice was posted. It went past the required dates. Nobody claimed their property, so now we can go in and we can trash it out. This is what they're going to do. They're literally just going to take everything and throw it in that big dumpster and take it to the dump. Okay? You can see that they're going to leave any items that are necessary for the property. So in the back, we can see that they've left folding doors for a closet, and that's it. Everything else is trashed out. Here's a couple more examples. Okay? We went to this property. There was junk everywhere. And then the prop pres crew came out, took it all to the dump, and now we're ready to go through with our valuations. Okay, and that's how it should look. We shouldn't have any personal items remaining once they're done with the trash out. So we have secured the property. We've had it rekeyed. We've completed the trash out. We're going to do the lawn care. And the main thing with the lawn care is we want to make sure that we're not incurring any code violations. This house on the left could get a code violation. The house on the right looks fantastic. So it doesn't mean that we're going to do landscaping. We're just going to take care of the lawn. So whoever the assigned property preservation vendor is, whether it's a big national vendor assigned by the outsourcer or whether it's somebody local that you're working with, they're going to go out and we're just going to cut the grass. Okay, we're going to cut the grass. We're going to remove all of the grass clippings, and we're going to trim up the bushes and the flower beds as much as possible, but again, we're not doing landscaping. There is a standard schedule, and most people run off of the Fannie Mae schedule, which is what this is. It's a standard schedule for when the property should be taken care of, really just based on growth. So you'll find wherever your state is, and of course, you're going to go off of your outsourcer guidelines, and they'll tell you how often the grass needs to be mowed and the lawn needs to be taken care of. This is really just a guide. So if I'm looking at my area, I'm in Utah, so I'm the third one down. So April 1st through October 31st, they're going to go cut it once a month. In the summer, that's going to leave for some pretty long grass, but as long as that's what the client wants, that's fine. Some of your other areas where it gets a little thicker, they're going to want 2 times per month. Okay, and then there's other areas like down in Arizona where you're going to cut it year-round once a month, and in Florida, California, Hawaii, they're going to cut it 2 times per month all year round. So your outsourcer will have a schedule like this, and the prop pres vendors that you work with need to know what this is and adhere to it, and then you're going to do follow-ups to make sure that they're following the schedule. Okay, so here's another great example of an REO property. We go out and it looks like the jungle's trying to take this bad boy back, right? Like we can barely see the steps. We've got it growing up on the sides of the house, and then we've just gone out and we've cut everything down and we've taken all the grass clippings out. And that's exactly what you want to see from the lawn care during initial services. And then during your ongoing services, when you do your inspections, you want to make sure that the grass is being maintained like it is on the right. And so here's another example where we're just going to go in, we're going to clean it up. You can tell on the left that the grass isn't in the best condition, but once we cut it down, it shows well, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, this is an example of just the leaves. So as you move forward and we go into fall, your outsourcer may want to go out there and make sure that all the leaves get taken care of and the yard is free of debris. This is an example of free of debris. So if we had tree branches or anything that had fallen on the grass, we'd want those taken off as well. But this is just going out and saying, okay, let's go out and make sure that all the leaves are taken from the property so that it is free of debris. Okay. Now, working with flower beds and bushes, like I said, we're not going to do landscaping, but they are going to clean it up so that we don't have any code violations. And in this scenario, we've gone through, this has been trimmed up really well, and you may not always see it to this extent, but you will see them go in and pull weeds, and they would take that big bush that's blocking the windows and just chop it down. Okay, probably cut it as short as possible so that it doesn't grow back while we're marketing the asset and while it's still being bank owned. But it's not unlikely that you'll see something like this where they've gone in, they've taken care of the lawn. Even if you have to do it as an out-of-scope thing, we want to avoid code violations, and overgrown like this could be a code violation. Okay, so work with your outsourcer to determine the extent of maintenance that they want to see with the lawn. Okay, winterization. So with the winterization, that's going to adhere to a schedule just like we do with the lawn care. Okay, so first we're going to walk through what winterization is, how it's done, and then we'll take a look at what the schedule is for that. Okay, so we have 2 types of winterizations. We have a wet winterization, which is for boiler systems. It's also for radiant heat systems. And then we also have the dry winterization, which is for forced air systems. So here's the dry heat winterization process. It's pretty simple. We're just going to turn off all the water, and we're going to turn it off at the curb. Okay, we're going to drain the system from all the water. So I'm going to drain the sinks, I'm going to drain the water heater, the hot water heater, and then we're going to blow out the pipes with an air compressor, and that's going to pressurize it and make sure we don't have any cracks or any leaks in the pipes itself, and then also to make sure that we're getting all of the water out. So that's pressure testing the system. Then we're going to add antifreeze, and then we're going to tape everything off and let people know that, hey, this property has been winterized, don't use it. Okay, very simple, very straightforward. With a wet heat winterization process, it's a little more complicated. We're still going to drain the boiler and any heating loops that have water running through it, fill up the boiler with antifreeze, flush the lines, bleed the vents, and then we're basically going to set the thermostat to 55 degrees. Okay, so with a dry winterization, we're going to actually go through and remove everything, put the antifreeze in, tape everything off, and then we're not worried about the property being on, so then we're not worried about the heat being on. And in a wet winterization, we are going to turn the furnace on. We're going to still post our notices that it's been winterized and our do not remove and do not touch and all that good stuff, but we're going to leave the heat at 55 degrees. Okay? So here's an example of winterization in progress. And the reason I put these progress photos in here is that this is what you're going to see from the vendor that's doing the winterization so that we can prove to the outsourcer that we did everything we were supposed to do. And they would submit photos like this to get reimbursed. And so this is what we're looking for. You would see time-lapse photos. Let's take this toilet at the top. You would see this. You would see the antifreeze going in, and then the next picture you would see it taped off with a big note that says this property is winterized, antifreeze has been added, do not use. Okay, same thing with the water heater. We're just going to see that drained out, an action photo of that being drained out. And then they're going to put just simple tape across it and notices. So here's the winterization schedule, and here's what you would see. So in Alaska, they're going to do it year-round, and then there's places where they're not going to do it. Now this is a standardization schedule I took from Fannie Mae. So I know that with VA, there were other areas that we wouldn't do. So like Arizona, parts of Arizona and California, Florida, we wouldn't do the winterization. So you definitely want to check with your outsourcer to see what the bank wants to do. This is just a guide. Okay, this is not an end-all be-all for everybody. But what you would do is you'd watch to see where your property falls in. So I'm going to look at mine as an example. Again, I am in Utah. So Utah's that third tier, so it's saying October 1st to March 31st, we're going to winterize the property. So any property that I receive after October 1st up to March 31st, when we complete my initial services, the vendor is going to winterize the property as part of their initial services. We're not going to go back out after March 31st and de-winterize, but any new inventory I got after March 31st would not automatically be winterized. But now if I got a property April 1st, it's not going to be winterized. But if I haven't sold that property by October 1st, then it would be part of a winterization schedule where we would have a vendor come out and winterize every property that hadn't already been winterized. Okay, so just make sure you're working with your outsourcer to understand what this schedule is so that you can adhere to it. So winterized properties may be de-winterized for inspections depending on the client. I've had some where they say, yep, we will de-winterize it, but the expense is on the client, and they have to turn all the utilities on, pay for the property to be de-winterized, and pay for it to be winterized again. And then there are some that say, okay, well, we will do it, but we'll do it up to 3 times. We'll de-winterize and re-winterize the property. So understand what your client will allow. But when you're de-winterizing a property, the property is now exposed to the elements, and you run a risk of freezing. And that's the whole point of winterizing a property, is to avoid freeze damage, right? So the industry standard is to re-winterize a property within 3 to 7 days of being de-winterized. So if you have a property that is going to be de-winterized for inspections, you want to make sure that you coordinate the re-winterization with the inspection. We don't just want to go in, de-winterize it, and leave it open for 14 days while they do their due diligence and then just go back and winterize it again. We basically want to say, okay, the de-winterization will take place on this date. Let's say it's the 1st. You have until the 3rd to complete your inspections of the property system, because then I'm going to have it re-winterized. Okay? All right. Now the next step is a sales clean. So we have rekeyed the home. We've completed a trash out. We've completed our lawn care, and we've winterized the system. So now that everything's out, we're going to do a sales clean. Now the sales clean, just like with cash or keys, it's going to be broom swept. So if the carpet is really trashed and we can't, let's say it's heavily soiled, we can still leave it in broom swept condition, which means we can vacuum the carpet, or we can literally take a broom and just brush all the debris off of it and sweep up any floors, like linoleum floors, tile floors, wood floors, anything like that, and get the junk out. And then the standard for the sales clean is soap and water, okay? And you're going to be verifying this when you go out. As funny as it sounds, there's a lot of vendors that cut corners and they just use water. So you go touch the counters and it's still grimy and everything looks really dirty. So the standard is soap and water and then broom swept. So this is a picture of a sales clean in action, and this is a very detailed one. They're actually doing more than most vendors will, but you can see she has her soap and water behind. And then we also have a cleaning detergent on the counter, and she's going through and she's wiping everything. Now this is how you would see the photos come over from whatever prop pres vendor you're working with. so that they can show, look, they're always going to do action photos of any item because it will be tough for the outsourcer to see whether the home is clean or not in a picture, okay? So we'll see action photos like this. Now, one thing that I always suggest is that they should be using Clorox wipes. It's very easy to just grab a wipe everything down. It's going to be clean. It's going to save you the hassle, and it's cheap. So totally up to you. We're going to talk about this more during our property preservation and some tips I have for really standing out with managing that property. One of them is always carry Clorox wipes with you. Okay. So with the sales clean, I know this is really hard to see. It's not the best picture. But this would be an example of where we've done the trash out. We've got that picture on the left. The home is definitely dated. It's going to need a ton of updates, but that's not what we're trying to do at this point. We have completed the trash out, and now we just want to wipe everything down. So we would see action photos of someone actually wiping those counters down and sweeping the floor out and maybe cleaning the sink, right? But that's what it should look like. When we deliver photos to our outsourcer, they should always be of the right-hand side. It should look like that. Even though the property is dated, it should always be clean and free of debris. And here's one more example. This is a great example of what an REO home would look like. We can see the carpet's not in the best condition, but it's free of debris. It doesn't look like it's been vacuumed, and that's fine. It doesn't need to be. It's broom swept. It doesn't have any garbage on it. Same thing with the floors. Okay? All right, so swimming pools. If you're in an area that has a swimming pool, your outsourcer is going to have very specific guidelines on how to handle the pool and what their strategy is for working with pools. So what I have for you next is it's very general guidelines that I've experienced in my time with outsourcers and really is industry standard. But again, the disclaimer is whatever your client wants is always going to override what I'm telling you here. Okay? So swimming pools. Most above ground pools you're just going to take out. The only exception to that would be a situation where you have a deck that is built specifically for the above ground pool, and the home is going to look like garbage if you take it out. But for the most part, above ground pools, you're not going to service them, you're not going to winterize them, you're not going to do anything except trash them out, okay? Now, if you have an in-ground pool, there's a couple different strategies that you can use. Something like this is going to be a selling feature because the pool, once it's cleaned up, looks fantastic. So with the initial services, you may have a designated amount of money that can go towards initial pool service, where you're going to actually go out and shock and clean the system, do an inspection on the pumps, and then fill it with water. And if not, you would just get that bid as an out-of-scope item if you and the asset manager feel like the pool needs to be cleaned and filled to get the most money possible and sell in the quickest amount of time. Okay, that's up to the outsourcer. And you would work with them to determine what the best strategy is, whether you just want to take this thing, drain it, and clean it, and cover it, or if you want to actually fill it all the way up and make sure that it shows well. Now, most outsourcers are going to want to make sure that there's a fence of some kind. So I put this picture up here just because this is showing a fence that's not really built as part of the house, right? We can see that we've got a bigger stone fence on the side, a stone or stucco fence running around. If they were going to leave the pool with water so that it shows well, you may see a fence like this put up so that we can keep kids out. That's it. It's just safety and liability purposes. And so they're going to want to make sure that the fence is secure. So that means putting up a temporary fence if there's not a fence there currently. If there is a fence there, it's making sure that there's a lock on it, a padlock on it. And if the fence is broken, it's getting bids to fix the fence so that nobody can get into that pool area. Now, you may have times where they say, you know what, we're just going to cover the pool. Okay. This pool here should have been drained all the way because right now this is a breeding ground for mosquitoes. And if a city enforcer were to see this, the outsourcer and you, if you're representing the property, could get a fine because we can't have standing water in certain cities to avoid the mosquitoes and the bug problem. But I put this picture up not for the way that the water is in it, but to show you that this is the perfect example of an REO pool cover. Okay, we're not going to put a really nice retractable pool cover. We're not going to put the really nice tarp down for the most part. Now that may happen on higher end properties, but 9 out of 10 properties are going to have something like this. It's basically just 2x4s and chicken wire. And it's done in a way that nobody can fall through. And that's all we're trying to do. We're just protecting the property. Okay, so we've taken care of the pool. We've rekeyed the property. We've done the trash out. We've done our initial lawn care. We've done our sales clean. Now we're going to look and make sure that the property is secure and it's safe. So we're going to look for broken windows. We're going to look for doors that can't be locked, like missing doors, or any damage that prevents us from actually rekeying and locking the door. And we're going to board them up. Okay, so here's some examples of some properties just being boarded up, and that's all it is. It's some plywood. And then on the other side of this, you would see a couple 2x4s preventing that from being opened. And then this is a great example of a no trespassing sign. So these are the signs that you're going to post for the bank, and they're going to give you a list of what they want. Most of the time it's going to be contact information for the prop pres vendor, your contact information, and then some kind of notice saying, hey, this is bank owned. Okay, your job is to go out and inspect the property to make sure that everybody did what they were supposed to do. Now, depending on the outsourcer, you may work with a national property pres vendor, or they may say, hey, I need you to go find a bunch of locals to take care of these. Now, this is an example of a national property preservation vendor that works with REOs. This is Safeguard. They work across the country, and basically an outsourcer could call Safeguard and say, hey, I want you guys to manage all the property preservation services of my assets. And then they would work out a deal with Safeguard where they would pay them a flat fee for the life of the asset. So let's say that flat fee is $2,000, and we say, hey, Safeguard, we're going to pay you $2,000 for you to do your initial services. They'll cover it, and then you would have a service level agreement that would say, okay, so if we have to do excessive grass out, then here's the bid for that. Or if there's too much trash in the property, here's a bid for that. But if the outsourcer is working with a national vendor like this, then Safeguard, that's your contact, and then they would assign it to a local vendor that would take care of the property on their behalf. So this is just to reiterate the flat fee program, because more and more outsourcers and banks are going to this as a way to manage their expenses. Okay, so with the flat fee, initial and ongoing services are going to be included for a one-time payment, and that could be all paid up front, or they could pay portions of it, half now and then half when the asset closes. But if you have a la carte items, then each preservation item has a dollar threshold and a separate approval. So they would say you're approved up to X amount of dollars for lawn care, or anytime you have a pool, we want to see 2 bids before we service it. So now that we have completed our initial services, our property is vacant, we've completed initial services, the home is now secure, the trash has been removed, we've done our sales clean, the lawn has been maintained, we've done a winterization. Now it's time to figure out what the property is worth. Okay, so the next step is to go to our property valuations. Now, when we value a property in REO, we're going to do it with 2 separate values. Number 1 is going to be a BPO, that broker price opinion, and we can do it with an appraisal. An appraisal would come from a third-party appraisal company like PCV Mercor. Does standalone appraisals for REO, but most likely you're going to see a BPO from the listing agent, from you, and then you'll also see a second BPO or a third BPO from a BPO company or another agent in the area. I know when I got started with REO back in 2007, the original idea was I would have 2 agents in the area, and they would just alternate completing BPOs. One would get the listing, one would just do a free BPO for us. But as REO exploded and expanded, we started working with BPO companies, which is a great way for you to get your foot in the door with these outsourcers by doing the BPOs. And they don't pay a lot. They pay $40 or $50 per BPO. But it's a good way to get some experience doing BPOs for REO, and it's a good way to get your name in front of asset managers. Okay, but that's a separate conversation. So as we're going through and doing our property valuation, we're going to just get different opinions of value. And typically you're going to see 2 BPOs or a BPO and an appraisal. Now, once the values are complete, the asset manager or evaluation department is going to scrub those to make sure the information is complete and accurate, and make sure we have all the photos and the information we need. Once we do, the asset's going to move to reconciliation. Okay? Reconciliation is just when the asset manager or evaluation specialist takes a look at the two values, and then they determine a final as-is value and a final as repaired. Okay? The as-is value is just if I were to sell it today without doing anything, what is the home worth? And then if I were to repair it, how much would the home be worth? Okay? The things we're looking at with this is asset managers are working within specific time frames for the client. So the client may say, hey, I want a 30-day value on everything. So as they reconcile the values, they're going to select one sold comp and one list comp for their final valuation and say, here's my 30-day, like here's the price to sell in 30 days or 45 or whatever the client has set up. Here's that value to sell within that time frame. Now, ideally, and this would be the ideal world, all the valuations would be very similar. The appraiser and you as the agent doing the BPO would pull the same sold and list comparables. That doesn't always happen. But if the valuations are close enough, we can have what's called an automatic reconciliation, which would be based on certain variances and measures in the outsourcer's system. Okay? Sounds like a lot, but it basically just means if the two values are close enough, we're not going to trigger anybody to review them. We're just going to give an average of the values, or we're going to give a value set on different rules. Okay? So let me show you what that looks like. This is a total non-existent thing, guys. I just threw this together because I wanted to give you an example of what someone would set up, and this is what we would set up. So when I look at reconciliation, I have my value bands. Okay? Less than 50K, 50 to 100, 150 to 200, 200 to 300, and then anything that's over 300,000. So here's my as-is variance. So my as-is variance is $5,000. So if the property is less than 50 grand, and you would do like the higher value. So if the highest value is less than 50,000 and the two variances are less than 5 grand, then you're just going to go with the higher of the two values. So let's do an example here. I'm going to take a value. I'm going to take a low value property that's under 50 grand, and I'm going to say this. Okay, my BPO came in at $45,000, and my appraisal came in at $42,000. So if I look up at my matrix, I can see that I am less than $50,000, and I'm looking for an as-is variance of $5,000 or less. My BPO is at 45. My appraisal is at 42,000. Which means that I have a variance of $3,000, right? 45,000 minus 42,000 gives me a $3,000 variance. So I'm within my threshold. My threshold was up to 5,000. I'm below that. So I'm going to auto-reconcile. I'm going to look at my chart, and it's going to say the higher of the two values. So in this scenario, I would get an auto-reconciliation of the higher value, which is the BPO, so $45,000. Okay, now we're into marketing. And we have received an auto reconciliation, or else the asset manager or evaluation department has reconciled the value and given us an as-is and an as-repaired valuation. So now the asset manager is going to look at that, and they're going to look at your BPO, they're going to look at the property, the valuations, and then they're going to start asking themselves marketing questions. And the number one thing is, who's my target buyer? Am I going after a first-timer? Am I going after a move-up? Am I going after an investor? What type of financing are they using? If I'm going after a first-time home buyer with FHA financing, then I need to make sure that the property will qualify for FHA financing. So that leads to my next question: what repairs need to be made? Now, I may make repairs to qualify for financing, and I may make repairs to appeal to a target buyer, such as like a first-time home buyer. My strategy as an asset manager, when I was an asset manager, was if I'm going after a first-time home buyer, I'm going to always put new carpet in and get new paint, because I felt anybody who was buying their first home should walk in and have fresh carpet. And that was just me. That's the thing I love to do, but it helped my property sell. And as long as I could make back the money that we spent on the carpet, I was fine. Okay? So you're going to have different things for each asset manager, but these are the questions they're going to ask. Who's my target buyer? And these are things they're asking on your BPO also. Who's the target buyer? What is the target financing? And then what repairs need to be made, either to decrease the days on market, lead to a higher return on investment, qualify for financing, or appeal to that target buyer. So now that we're listing, I want to put it on my MLS. I'm going to put good property photos, not junkers just because it's an REO. I want to treat it like I would a traditional listing. And I'm going to put really clean photos, interior photos. I'm going to put good agent remarks, a property description, any seller required verbiage. And going into REO, you're going to have certain words you can say and those you can't. And then you're also going to have specific verbiage and documents that you want to put in based on whatever client you're working with. So here's an example of a property that's owned by the VA. It's listed in my area, so I pulled this directly off of the MLS. And on this one, you'll see with the agent remarks, we're going to provide that information that the seller wants. So one of the number one reasons we rejected contracts is they didn't have the right owner of record on them. So this agent has come out and said very clearly, the seller's name is the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Seller does not pay customary closing costs, including title policy, escrow fees, survey, or transfer fees. Proof of funds or lender pre-approval letter required, dated within the last 30 days. So they're telling me what constitutes a full package. Property sold as is, saying we're not going to do any repairs to it. Earnest money to be made out to title company of buyer's choice. Now you'll have a lot of banks that want to use a specific title company, and they're going to mandate that the earnest money be made out to that title company and that you use that title company in order to get any kind of title fees paid by the seller. And then here's the big one. Please see the attached VA purchase and sales agreement that needs to be submitted in place of the rep seat. No state contract required. It took a long time for the VA to get this short VA document approved. And so what they're saying is this is generic. This will go through all 50 states. I don't need your state contract. I want this form filled out. And then here's a big one. Electronic signatures are not accepted. So with this agent remarks, they're telling us a lot of information. They're telling us that if you submit an offer that doesn't have the name as the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, that does not have a pre-approval letter or proof of funds within 30 days, and if you are not using the VA sales of contract with wet signatures, then most likely this is going to be rejected. The offer won't be considered a complete package. You'd be rejected and you'd have to go out and get new things. Now, where this is really important is because it says right there, electronic signatures not accepted. So anytime you have to correct this information, you have to get wet signatures. So huge pain. So make sure you're giving very clear descriptions. I would go one step further on this one. As the agent, I would have asked them to say that if you don't follow these rules, the offer is going to be rejected. Okay, because it would be rejected by the asset manager once it gets there, and it's a big headache. But for the most part, they've got good information in here. The asset manager has actually seen the MLS remarks and signed off on it, and they would have the ability to say, no, I want you to change it. So they're going to see the remarks and the agent remarks, the public and the agent remarks. And then we have attached documents, okay? And the attached document is that VA sales contract. So you will want to attach any document that your client has specifically. And then I would also include any instructions or links to videos on how to submit an offer or really setting the expectation. But we're going to go over that more in our marketing and offer management piece. Okay. Now you will most likely work with a client that has a first look period. A first look period really just means that for a certain amount of days after the property is listed, it can only be sold to a certain demographic. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that a first look period is still going to apply to a property in bad condition that may be a cash-only market strategy. So you take a look at this gem. This might be subject to a first look period. Now, you're welcome to argue that with the asset manager and say, look, it doesn't qualify for financing. I'm not going to get anybody in here. I need a cash investor who just wants to bulldoze it and use the land. And they may make an exception, but for the most part, every property will fall under those first look periods if one is established. But make sure you understand the guidelines. Make sure you understand what the first look period entails, and then work with the asset manager if you feel very strongly that it should not be subject to a first look period. Now, we saw it with the VA that you are going to have client-specific remarks that need to be in the MLS. And again, we've gone over all this, but just to reiterate, here's the information from the VA. It very specifically said, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, we're not going to pay customary closing costs. We need proof of funds or a pre-approval letter dated within 30 days. Property sold as is. I have a sales agreement. You don't need to submit your state rep seat, and then electronic signatures are not accepted. Okay, here's some instructions from Fannie Mae. Show any time, no appointment necessary. The seller has directed that all offers on this listing be made using HomePath Online Offer System, and then it's going to give some instructions. So this is a lot of verbiage, but it's a lot of really good information because it's basically saying what you need to do. Here's what they constitute as a full offer package. You will need to submit a buyer executed rep C, a Fannie Mae rep C that has the addendum, an owner occupant certification, and then if they select a buyer that is an owner occupant, they actually have to go through and complete a HomePath ready buyer ownership course that's on homepath.com, and then attach the certificate to the offer to get the closing costs, right? So a lot of information on this one, but it's good information, and this is what you would want. Nobody can walk into this and say, yeah, I didn't realize that I had to have them do this certificate, or that I had to use your rep C. Like we saw with the VA information in the MLS, they had attached the VA sales contract. So if you have client-specific documents, you're going to want to upload and attach those to the MLS so that everybody has them and can comply. So here's some scenarios. I took these directly from my MLS. This first one here is for the VA, so I have a VA sales contract. The second one is from Caliber Home Loans, so I have their owner occupancy certificate and their documents. And then I go to Fannie Mae that has a lot more information, but this one has offer submission instructions, which is great, and then some other requirements, their owner occupant certification, and then what to expect during the transaction. So a lot of really good documents in there to help ease through the process. We talked about a little bit with the VA because they spelled out that we need a pre-approval letter dated within 30 days or proof of funds within 30 days. And that leads us to this, that for the outsourcer to review the offer and negotiate, it needs to be what they consider a complete offer package. Now, each client's going to define their complete offer package differently. So again, you want to make sure that you're working with the outsourcer to understand what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and then you're communicating that well, like we saw with the agent remarks from Fannie Mae and from VA. The standard, the industry standard for a complete package is a complete rep C, pre-approval and proof of funds dated within 30 days, any seller disclosures or seller addendums like the Fannie Mae addendum, and then if you're submitting an offer from an LLC, then you would want articles of incorporation to make sure that the former owners and to make sure the agent isn't on that LLC trying to buy the property. Now, once an asset goes under contract in REO, the closing process is really like a traditional sale. Okay? They're nearly identical. The only exception is the time. It might take a little bit more time because we're trying to get the title transferred. And with REO, title is just marketable title. And the whole time this home is being marketed, you may have a title department that's working on some previous judgments and clouds on title that didn't get cleared through the foreclosure. And if that's the case, you may see some delays. And we're going to talk about reconveyance in just a second. But title's transferred as a marketable title. It's a special warranty deed or a quitclaim. And then closing is going to take place through a title office, even though it may be managed through a national closing company. And then if you're in an attorney state, of course, it's going to take place at the attorney's office. Now, REO title, like I was saying, it is marketable title, which is title that is free from valid claims by outside parties. Now, the outsourcer is going to work to remove any claims that were not cleared through foreclosure, and that's what the title department does, is they just make sure that they can give you marketable title, free of any claims, and a claim would just be any kind of lien or encumbrance. It's typically transferred by special warranty deed, which would be financeable, or quitclaim, which I've only seen one lender actually finance. If it is a quitclaim, you're typically looking cash, and quitclaim offers no protection at all. It's saying here you're taking the property and assuming all liability. So if an outsourcer is working with a title that has a lot of clouds are just issues like liens on title, right? If they're working with a lot of those, they may sell the property discounted and sell as a quitclaim to an investor for cash, and they basically say, hey, I'm giving this to you, you go resolve all the title issues. Now, if they can't, this is one of the worst things, if they can't resolve those title issues, if they can't get the clouds on title, removed, then you may run into a reconveyance scenario. A reconveyance scenario is where the outsourcer and the bank send the property back through the foreclosure process to get rid of the clouds on title. So they would actually send it back to the servicer and say, you need to buy this back. We're going to reconvey it. You can re-foreclose and do all that stuff, but you need to remove these clouds on title. Where this becomes a challenge is that you may have a buyer that's under contract for financing and is getting ready to move in. And if they haven't removed those clouds on title and they reconvey, then that person is not moving into the house. And that leads to a ton of escalations and a ton of problems. So you definitely want to watch that. But again, a cloud on title is just a lien that's on title. It's called a cloud on title. Needs to be resolved prior to closing unless you're closing with a quit claim. And in that case, the person buying it is accepting the title with all of its defects. And then any unresolved clouds may be reconveyed back to the servicer prior to closing, and then they'll have to the servicer will have to resolve the clouds, re-foreclose, and then handle those discrepancies on their own dime. So they would have to pay for them. And believe it or not, that is it for us. So I know that is a big module. That is REO 101, not so much in a nutshell, but there it is for you. So questions, comments, anything that you have, let's get those posted. Hit me up on Facebook, send me messages. We are going to reiterate a lot of these processes as we go through the different modules and give you the tips and tricks to really stand out and just be a total badass in the REO space. So we'll hit this a couple times. We'll keep reviewing it. You'll see it over and over again. Again, this is just the foundation. So if you have questions or comments, get those over to us. And if not, I really appreciate your time, really appreciate your attention. I know this was a long one, and I look forward to seeing you in our next module.